The millionaire forbade the maid from touching his baby, until one day, Christopher Blake had it all. Wealth, power, and a mansion that looked more like a castle. But he also had one unbreakable rule. No one, absolutely no one, was allowed to touch his daughter Lily. The order was harsh, cruel, but it was born from the fear of losing once again what he loved most. Hannah Miller, the 32-year-old maid, knew this rule better than anyone. Even so, every time she saw the baby alone in the crib, her heart tightened. She carried a pain no one else knew. She too had lost a child. What neither of them imagined was that, on a stormy night, this rule would be broken, and it would change their lives forever. Christopher Blake's mansion rose like a stone ship on top of the hill, cutting into the winter sky. Wide glass windows reflected the city in the distance, but inside the air was controlled, cold, and silent. At 43, the millionaire paced the marble corridors with measured steps and a life ruled by schedules. Since his wife's death during childbirth, every clock in the house seemed to measure not time, but the distance from his loss. At the end of the hallway, little Lily slept, surrounded by discreet monitors and translucent curtains. No touch was allowed, no approach without permission, no gesture beyond the necessary. Longtime employees repeated the rule with ritualistic precision. No one would lay a hand on the child. Doors opened in silence, vacuums hummed softly, trays were delivered without a sound. Everything there obeyed a choreography of protection that was more about fear than order. And the house, despite its perfection, seemed to listen to a sad song that never ceased. Inside, Christopher carried a raging ocean hidden behind his immaculate suit. Many times he hesitated by the crib, tormented by thoughts he never admitted, not even to himself. He believed the world was a hostile place where love could be torn away in an instant. That's why he guarded doors, dictated rules, and turned care into a barrier, as though building walls against the impossible. At night, the glass of whiskey didn't warm his hands. It only gave the illusion of control. He feared human error, he feared failure. Above all, he feared delegating what he considered the last thing he had left. Lily was the thread that anchored him, but the anchor was so heavy it kept him from resurfacing. There was tenderness in his eyes, but it appeared and vanished like a lighthouse in the fog. The love he felt was real, but imprisoned in a ritual of vigilance that consumed him. And while he watched, he failed to see that this vigilance also distanced him from the very thing he meant to protect. It was in this setting that Hannah Miller walked through the iron gate, bringing in a simple bag more courage than belongings. At 29, her eyes scanned every detail as if reading instructions to a new world. She listened to the rules, signed papers, received an ID badge, and was led to a narrow room with a window to the garden. Her posture was careful, but inside she carried thoughts she didn't dare voice. She hadn't come to replace anyone, but to keep the house breathing between dust and linens. Still, there was something about Lily that lit a forgotten warmth within her, like embers beneath ashes. Passing by the nursery hallway, she felt the entire house hold its breath. The rule was clear, repeated, emphasized: clean, organize, leave, never touch. Even so, fate's curiosity often chooses those who walk silently to test them. And in that house where nothing seemed to happen, an unexpected encounter was already unfolding, silent and inevitable. Hannah Miller woke before the sun touched the stained glass windows of the mansion, moving with light steps so as not to break the imposing silence of that place. Every object seemed to have its own hierarchy: crystal vases, Persian rugs, gilded frames. She saw herself as part of the scenery, as invisible as the dust she cleaned. Yet her gaze searched for something beyond work. Little Lily, the child, wrapped in delicate clothes and surrounded by expensive toys, seemed lonely inside the crib, like a jewel locked in a safe. Hannah cleaned every corner of the room with the discipline of someone fulfilling a promise, but her heart tightened as she pretended indifference before the girl's curious eyes. And though she tried to resist, each passing day made the distance between them weigh heavier than any household task. Within Hannah was a wound that had never healed. She had lost a baby years before, on a night when the crying stopped forever, leaving behind a void impossible to fill. The past made her even more sensitive to Lily's presence, whose soft breathing and innocent smile seemed to touch hidden fibers of her soul. While polishing the wood of a dresser near the crib, she found herself listening to the child's gentle sounds, and the memory of what she couldn't live with her son returned as a painful echo. Obeying Christopher's cruel order was what kept her job, but yielding to instinct was what called from within. The fear of being caught consumed her, yet the desire to protect that fragile life was already growing inside her like a seed impossible to contain. Christopher, meanwhile, watched from a distance, attentive to the new maid's every move. His suspicion was silent but constant, like a shadow always present. He allowed no gaps, no mistakes. The rule forbidding anyone from touching Lily was not just an order but a wall built with bricks of fear. To him, no one would ever be worthy of caring for his daughter, because deep down he believed that any gesture from another could mean loss. This excessive protection was not born from cruelty, but from terror, and that was precisely what made it so cruel. Hannah felt the weight of this barrier every day, as if she were breathing air that had been rationed. But sooner or later, she would be forced to choose between respecting the rule and following her heart. And destiny, which does not obey human orders, was already weaving silently the moment when everything would change. That morning, the sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the mansion in golden rays, painting the hallway with warm tones that contrasted with the marble walls' permanent chill. Hannah Miller walked with bucket and cloth in hand, trying to ignore the soft sound coming from Lily's room. The child's cry, though contained, carried the force of a call impossible to resist. Hannah stopped at the half-open door, and for an instant, the silence of the house seemed to vanish. She looked inside and saw Lily waving her little hands, her tiny face wrinkled in distress. The impulse to step in and soothe the girl took over her body, but Christopher's order echoed like chains. "Never touch my daughter." With her heart racing, she stepped back, torn between obedience and instinct. Inside her, thoughts collided. Just one step would cross the invisible barrier that kept her from the crib. The desire to hold Lily in her arms wasn't born of defiance, but of a love that didn't ask permission to exist. Memories of her lost child flooded her mind, bringing tears that burned her eyes. It was as if her soul recognized in that child a second chance, a new beginning she had never dared to imagine. Yet with that tenderness came fear. If Christopher caught her, there would be no forgiveness. She would be dismissed without hesitation, as someone who dared cross a sacred boundary. Still, the image of Lily crying alone began carving itself into her memory like an open wound growing deeper with each day. Fate wasted no time in exposing this conflict. One afternoon, Christopher came home earlier than expected from a meeting and found Hannah standing near his daughter's room. The millionaire's cold eyes cut through her like blades, and his tone was as sharp as the silence that reigned there. "You can clean whatever you want, Hannah, but don't forget, she doesn't need you." His words fell like stones on the young woman's heart, and she lowered her eyes, swallowing hard. Christopher walked away, convinced he had reaffirmed his control, without realizing he had planted an even greater doubt inside her. No order would ever be strong enough to contain the tide already rising. In that silent, imposing house, the foreshadowing of a moment when everything would change was beginning to take shape. The nights in Christopher Blake's mansion were long. Cloaked in a silence even the clocks dared not break. He paced back and forth through the corridors, always with a glass of whiskey in hand, as if the liquid could numb the emptiness consuming him. Entering Lily's room, he would stand beside the crib, watching his daughter with tear-filled eyes he never allowed anyone else to see. He longed to touch her, to hold her, to feel her close, but the fear of losing her again paralyzed him. It was as if loving was too dangerous, as if any affection could trigger another tragedy. And so, he kept his distance, believing protection meant isolation. Meanwhile, in the small room assigned to her, Hannah Miller faced her own ghosts. Sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, her trembling hands resting on her lap, she closed her eyes and remembered the son she had lost. The memory came in waves, bringing back the sound of a cry that no longer existed. The emptiness still haunted her, the pain of not having been able to save the life she once carried in her womb. Every time she heard Lily in the house, longing replaced grief, a yearning to offer the embrace the child did not receive from her father. But along with that desire came fear. Obedience kept her job, disobedience could cost her everything. It was a silent game where Christopher believed he held control, but that control was nothing more than a fragile illusion. Life had a way of testing the harshest rules, and the millionaire was about to discover that in the cruelest of ways. Hannah, increasingly connected to the child, could no longer smother the instinct burning inside her chest. She knew that, sooner or later, she would be forced to choose between respecting the rule or saving a life. And on those cold nights, when Christopher was absent and the mansion was surrendered to silence, it felt as though fate whispered through the walls. Nothing would remain untouched for long. The sky darkened early that evening, as if foreseeing what was to come. Heavy clouds gathered over the hill, covering the moon with thick veils that sank the mansion into an unsettling gloom. The wind howled fiercely, scratching against the windows and bending the trees as if they longed to break free from the earth. Lightning slashed the horizon, painting the corridors in flashes of white light, revealing old portraits that seemed to come alive. Christopher Blake, pressed by an unexpected crisis at his company, had been forced to leave in a rush, leaving Lily in the care of the household. But the servants, fearful of the storm's strength, had been dismissed early, leaving only Hannah Miller, alone before the vastness of the mansion. With each thunderclap, the chandeliers swayed faintly, and the grand hallways now felt like the corridors of an abandoned fortress, waiting for something to happen. Hannah moved through the house with measured steps, carrying a candle in a brass holder, as the electricity flickered at unsettling intervals, threatening to vanish completely. The flame cast her shadow across the walls, stretching her figure until it looked as though she were being pursued by her own fears. Every creak of the wood, every whistle of wind through the cracks, deepened her sense of vulnerability. Though accustomed to living in silence, that night felt different, almost oppressive, as if the mansion itself were alive and watching her every move. Being alone with Lily was both a privilege and a burden, for she knew that any need of the baby would fall upon her. But how could she keep her distance if something happened? Christopher's command echoed in her mind like a sentence, and at the same time, like a barrier impossible to uphold. It was in this whirlwind of sounds and emotions that Hannah heard something that didn't belong to the storm. A muffled sound, short and stifled, coming from Lily's room. Her heart raced instantly, and the candle's flame wavered in her trembling hand. A chill ran down her spine as though time itself had stopped, suspending her between obedience and instinct. Without thinking, her feet moved on their own, running down the narrow hallway that led to the nursery. The wind slipping through the cracks made the curtains dance, as if trying to block her way, but Hannah did not stop. Reaching the half-open door, her breath caught in her throat. The truth was about to be revealed, and nothing in her life, Christopher's, or little Lily's would ever be the same after that night. Hannah pushed Lily's door open in a swift motion, and what she saw made her heart freeze. The candle's flame shook, throwing distorted shadows on the walls, yet still cast enough light to reveal the horror. Lily lay motionless in the crib, her tiny face turning purple, suffocated by the bedsheet wrapped around her head and neck. Time seemed to stop. Each second weighed like a crushing boulder, as if the universe itself watched in silence. The maternal instinct, dormant within Hannah since her past tragedy, burst forth like lightning, erasing every memory of Christopher's order. She rushed to the crib, set the candle down on the dresser, and with trembling hands pulled at the trapped fabric in desperation. Lily gasped for air, her tiny arms already losing strength, as death loomed over the room like a cruel intruder. Panic threatened to consume her, but Hannah's heart guided her hands with almost supernatural precision. She lifted Lily into her arms, holding her firmly, and began gently moving the child, trying to clear her airways. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless, as though they were blood shed in sacrifice. "Breathe, my little one, breathe. You can do it," she whispered in a broken voice, every word carrying not only plea but also memory. The memory of her own lost baby tore at her from within, yet also pushed her not to give up. The room seemed to shrink. The roar of the storm outside became a chorus of anguish, and the ticking of a distant clock grew louder than any thunder. In the chaos, Hannah no longer saw walls or furniture, only the girl in her arms, and the silent battle between life and death that depended solely on her. Then, when hope seemed almost gone, a miracle happened. Lily's body convulsed in a spasm, and a fragile sound broke the silence. First a gasp, then a strong cry, hoarse but alive. It was the most precious sound heard in that mansion since the tragedy that had scarred it. Hannah sobbed in response, clutching the girl against her chest, her own pounding heart sinking with the baby's. Her tears now carried relief, and with each one came a vow. As long as she lived, she would protect Lily with all her strength. But with that relief also came painful awareness. She had broken Christopher Blake's sacred rule. When dawn came, the weight of her choice would fall on her shoulders like a sentence. Yet, looking at the child safe in her arms, Hannah knew there was no room for regret. On that stormy night, two lives became irreversibly entwined, and fate began writing a story neither of them could escape. The storm still raged over the mansion as Christopher Blake pulled his car into the driveway, the wheels slicing through deep puddles that splashed water in every direction. He stepped out, his overcoat drenched, his face marked by the exhaustion of long hours of crisis at his company. Entering through the main gate, he immediately sensed a different energy in the air. The silence wasn't the usual silence. There was something charged, almost tangible, vibrating through the walls. Christopher always carried the expectation of disaster, as though any absence was enough to bring the world crashing down on him once again. Climbing the stairs, his severe eyes scanned the corridor up to his daughter's room, and the muffled sound of crying coming from within made his whole body freeze. Every step felt like an eternity until the door finally opened before him, and the scene struck him like an invisible blade. Inside the room, Hannah Miller was sitting in the armchair beside the crib, holding Lily in her arms. Tears streamed down her face, still marked by the despair of the battle she had fought only minutes earlier. The child, now recovered, breathed in ragged sobs, clinging to the maid's chest as if she had found in her embrace the only possible refuge. Shock coursed through Christopher. His heart tightened, torn between the relief of seeing his daughter alive and the fury of witnessing his most sacred rule broken. His breath quickened, his fists clenched, and his eyes glimmered with the hardness of a man on the verge of exploding. Yet something kept him from acting immediately. He froze for a moment, unable to decide whether to shout, expel Hannah, or simply fall to his knees and thank heaven for the miracle he had just witnessed. A silent battle raged inside him, Christopher felt betrayed, as though the wall he had built around his daughter had been breached. At the same time, he couldn't deny that Lily was alive thanks to the very woman he could barely tolerate. Pride and fear clashed violently with gratitude and vulnerability. His eyes swept over the scene once more. Hannah, exhausted yet steady. Lily, safe, slowly drifting to sleep in her arms. For the first time in years, Christopher felt control slip entirely from his grasp. It was as though life itself were showing him that no human decree could contain the inevitable. And even without saying it aloud, he knew destiny had chosen Hannah to be there, and that truth would torment him like a secret impossible to silence. Christopher stood motionless at the doorway for several endless seconds, watching Hannah with Lily in her arms. The tension in the air was like a rope about to snap. The millionaire's throat was dry, his heart racing, though his face remained rigid, incapable of showing the storm inside him. He stepped forward twice, the soles of his shoes echoing against the wooden floor, and Hannah lifted her eyes, startled, like someone caught in a grave crime. Her fingers instinctively pressed the baby tighter against her chest, the protective instinct overpowering reason. The silence between them was an invisible battlefield. On one side, the broken rule. On the other, a life saved. Inside Christopher, thoughts collided with violence. Part of him wanted to shout, to throw Hannah out of the house immediately, to reassert the dominance he believed absolute. But another part, smaller and buried, wanted only to thank her, to kneel, and admit he could not face the agony of losing Lily. His anger was born of pride, but his relief stemmed from something greater, from a love he no longer knew how to express. His eyes locked on Hannah, who trembled but did not look away. She didn't need to say anything. The child's state spoke for itself. Lily slept peacefully, as if she had found a safe harbor in the maid's arms. Hannah, for her part, was torn between fear and courage. She knew she would be judged, perhaps punished, but she could not regret her actions. That child was more than a duty. She was a piece of Hannah's soul that refused to be lost again. With a trembling voice, she tried to explain, but Christopher raised his hand, demanding silence. His eyes, full of contradictions, scanned the scene as though searching for an answer that would not come. The distant storm still echoed outside, but inside the room the true tempest was one of unspoken emotions. And in that dawn, though no words had been exchanged, something irreversible had happened between them. Christopher Blake took another step into the room, the firm sound of his soul against the wood echoing like a warning. His eyes were fixed on Hannah Miller, who still held Lily against her chest as if she were a part of herself. The scene looked like a living portrait of contradiction. A millionaire who had spent years building unbreakable walls, and before him a young woman who had broken the strictest rule of the house, yet saved the very life he most feared losing. The silence was unbearable, heavy with unspoken meaning. Hannah's hands grew sweaty, but she did not release the baby, while Christopher fought to choose between two irreconcilable truths: punish disobedience or recognize that this woman had achieved the impossible. Christopher's voice finally broke the silence, low, hoarse, as though it cost him to force the words out. He did not shout, as Hannah expected. Instead, he asked softly, almost in a whisper, "What happened here?" The simple phrase fell like lightning, leaving the maid stunned. Hannah took a deep breath, and her words came trembling, but filled with truth. She was suffocating in the crib. There was no one else. If I hadn't acted, she wouldn't be alive now. Each word pierced the armor of pride Christopher wore. He was transported back to the moment of his wife's death, when he too had felt powerless, incapable of saving the one he loved most. The terror of reliving that pain merged with the relief of having his daughter alive, thanks to the very woman he had forbidden to approach her. Hannah fell silent after speaking, her eyes fixed on the floor, as though awaiting an inevitable sentence. Her breathing was ragged, her body tense, yet inside her there was a fragile thread of peace, the certainty she had done the right thing. Christopher walked toward the crib and rested his trembling hands on the wooden edge, unable to look directly at either his daughter or Hannah. His mind was collapsing. On one hand, he wanted to reaffirm his authority and expel this woman from his home. On the other, he knew that if she hadn't acted, he would now be standing over a lifeless body. His lips pressed tightly together, incapable of voicing the decision tearing him apart. The atmosphere was heavy, as though every object in the room bore witness to the conflict. Outside, the storm still roared, but inside, the true tempest was made of pride, gratitude, and fear. And without realizing it, Christopher was no longer the same man he had been only hours earlier. Christopher remained still for long moments, watching Lily's small body asleep in Hannah Miller's arms. It was as if he were facing a shattered mirror. He saw his daughter alive, yet the image blurred with the reflection of his lost wife, the trauma still pulsing in his memory. His heart pounded, begging him to give thanks, but his mind drove him down the path of rage. He turned his head slowly toward Hannah, his eyes heavy with the weight of 1,000 internal battles. The words took their time to emerge, and when they did, they were sharp, cold as blades. "I told you I didn't want anyone to touch her." The icy tone made Hannah shudder, but she did not look away. The silence between them was like an invisible duel, where the next move would decide the fate of all three. Hannah swallowed hard, but her voice came, weak at first, then steadier, as though propelled by something stronger than fear. "I know what you said, but if I had obeyed, your daughter would be dead now." The words struck Christopher like a punch to the gut. He felt fury surge through his veins, yet at the same time he could not deny the truth weighing upon him. His body trembled, torn between the urge to cast her out of the mansion and the need to face the reality that, without this woman, Lily would no longer be breathing. The anger burned, but it was a restrained fury, one that could not explode because something stronger than pride held it back: the fear of loss. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to suppress the memories of the hospital, of the night he lost his wife, while Hannah's words echoed in his mind like a curse. He was tired of fighting against memories, against fate, and against his own heart. Yet his rigidity would not allow him to show weakness in front of Hannah. He stepped toward her with firm strides, his gaze hard, and Lily stirred faintly in the maid's arms, releasing a soft sigh that broke the tension for an instant. Hannah lowered her eyes but did not move. She held the baby as if it were her mission to protect her, even if it cost her everything. Christopher stopped in front of them, so close he could feel the warmth of the candlelight illuminating their faces. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. In that silence, it became clear that anger was no longer enough to mask the truth. And the truth haunted him because it carried with it the question he most feared to face. Christopher Blake remained before Hannah Miller, close enough to hear the trembling sound of her breath. Time seemed suspended, trapping them in a moment heavy with meaning. The millionaire's eyes wavered between the sleeping baby and the maid's face, reflecting an internal battle impossible to conceal. On one side, he saw the broken rule, the direct affront to his authority. On the other, he saw his daughter's salvation, something no money or power could ever buy. His mind screamed to cast Hannah out, to reassert his dominion over the mansion, but his heart whispered a troubling question. How much longer could he carry the burden of everything alone? In that instant, Christopher was about to confront the truth he avoided most, the truth that he needed someone. Hannah, feeling the weight of his gaze, drew a deep breath. She knew that any word could seal her fate, but at the same time, she could not remain silent. Yes, there was fear in her heart, but also courage, born of the certainty that she had made the right choice. "I didn't ask to be here, Mr. Blake," she said softly yet firmly. "But God placed me in your daughter's path tonight, and if that was a mistake, then I am willing to pay the price." Her words hung in the air like invisible arrows, striking the man at his most vulnerable point. For a moment, Christopher felt his legs weaken, recalling his wife and how she had always believed that love could heal the deepest wounds. But he was not ready to admit that aloud. Outwardly, he kept his rigid posture. Inside, he was a raging sea about to overflow. He leaned closer, bending over Lily, his hands hesitating before touching his daughter. He felt the child's soft warmth, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, and a knot formed in his throat. What would have become of this night if Hannah hadn't been there? The question echoed relentlessly, eroding the wall of pride he had built for years. Hannah watched in silence, her eyes brimming, uncertain whether she would be dismissed or thanked. Christopher closed his eyes and released a deep sigh, heavy as lead. Perhaps it was no longer possible to live by orders and prohibitions alone. That realization, still wrapped in anger and contradiction, opened the door to the question he feared most. How long could he keep Hannah away from Lily after this night? Christopher Blake stepped back slowly from the armchair, as if each movement cost more than he could bear. His expression was rigid, but behind it churned a storm of feelings, a heart that longed to give thanks and a mind that demanded punishment. The mansion was silent, save for the distant roar of the storm and the gentle sound of Lily's breathing, finally at peace. Christopher walked to the window, pulled the curtains open with a sharp gesture, and watched the rain streak down the glass like tears he would not allow himself to shed. He wanted to scream, to blame Hannah for breaking his command, but something held him back. The image of his daughter alive, breathing in the arms of the woman he had so bitterly rejected. The silence was not only contained fury, it was the fear of admitting that his world was beginning to crumble. Hannah remained seated, holding Lily carefully, not daring to move. Every beat of her heart felt like a warning that she was about to lose everything. Yet still she would not let go of the child. The memory of the crib suffocation returned with clarity. The desperation, the cry that had brought life back into the room. Nothing could erase that memory, not even Christopher's fury. For her, it had been more than a choice. It was an inevitable calling, dictated by love and not by rules. Her eyes lifted discreetly, resting on the millionaire, his back turned to her. A man surrounded by wealth, yet also by invisible scars. For the first time, Hannah realized he was not only cruel, he was someone broken by pain. Christopher turned slowly, as though the weight of his decision was too heavy to bear. His eyes, cold by habit, now carried a strange spark, almost vulnerability. He opened his mouth, closed it again, like someone rehearsing words they could not pronounce. He stepped closer to Hannah, leaned in, and gently took Lily from her arms, holding the child against his chest with a tense yet careful embrace. The girl sighed, nestling against her father, and the sound pierced the silence like an arrow. Hannah lowered her gaze, resigned, as if accepting any sentence. But he did not cast her out. He couldn't. Something prevented him from breaking that bond, no matter how hard he tried. The night lingered, suspended, filled with unanswered questions, as though destiny itself were waiting for dawn to reveal the next move. The night dragged slowly into morning until the first rays of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the curtains, bathing the room in pale light. The mansion remained silent, but Christopher Blake's heart was in turmoil. He had not closed his eyes all night. He sat in the armchair with Lily asleep in his arms, while Hannah Miller, exhausted, watched silently from the corner of the room. The storm had ended, but within him a war still raged, impossible to quiet. His eyes rested on his daughter, and his thoughts always returned to the same truth. She was alive only because of the woman he had forbidden to come near her. His pride kept him from admitting it, but the truth burned in his mind like searing iron. And as dawn brightened the walls, the certainty that something had changed became inescapable. Hannah, seated on the edge of the bed, dared not close her eyes. She wondered what her fate would be when Christopher finally spoke. Would she be expelled without the right to defend herself? Or allowed to remain, though under eternal suspicion? Her mind replayed the scene of the previous night. The suffocation in the crib, the desperation, the cry that restored life. She felt that experience had marked her forever, as though she had been given a new reason to exist. Her tearful eyes lifted discreetly toward Christopher, who looked like a statue of stone with his daughter in his arms. No matter what his decision would be, she would never regret it. Saving Lily had been a calling greater than obedience. As the first signs of day broke, Christopher drew a deep breath, as though preparing to face an invisible tribunal. His posture was rigid, but his turmoil was evident. Expelling Hannah would reaffirm the authority he had always defended, yet also deny the truth his eyes had witnessed. Keeping her meant admitting he needed her, and that was the deepest wound to his pride. He rose slowly, placed Lily back into the crib with care, and walked to the window. The sun rose golden over the city, but to him there was no beauty. His thoughts were a whirlwind of memories, fears, and possibilities. When his eyes turned back to Hannah, a new and unfamiliar doubt took hold in his heart. Perhaps this woman was not merely a maid, but someone fate had chosen to break the chains that bound him. Christopher Blake spent the entire day in silence, locked in his office, surrounded by piles of documents he couldn't bring himself to read. His mind was in collapse. Every time he tried to focus on business, the image of Hannah Miller holding Lily appeared, corroding his rigidity. The pen trembled in his hand, the numbers on the spreadsheets blurred, and even the golden clock on the desk seemed to mock his inability to decide. Too proud to thank, too proud to admit need, he hid behind routine, but could no longer find refuge in it. His anger was not directed at Hannah, but at himself, for having created a rule that had nearly cost his daughter's life. The more he tried to escape that thought, the deeper it dug into his conscience. Hannah, meanwhile, carried on with her duties as if nothing had happened, yet she bore the invisible weight of what she had lived through. Each time she passed near the crib, she felt Christopher's eyes upon her, even when he was not present. The mansion, once only a place of work, now felt like a prison of expectations and silences. She walked with her head held high, but inside battled the constant fear of being dismissed at any moment. Still, in her heart burned a spark of serenity. Lily's life was proof that love, even when it came from where least expected, could prevail. As she cleaned the corridors, she recalled the cry of the child reborn, and that sound became a force that sustained her. Despite the tension, she knew she would not go back, even if her choice had placed her directly in the path of her employer's wrath. By nightfall, Christopher descended the stairs with slow steps, finding Hannah in the main hall, arranging books on the shelf. The room was lit by the fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the walls, creating an atmosphere of judgment. The millionaire stopped before her, his eyes steady but his voice heavy with contradiction. "You broke my order," he said, his tone dry. Hannah did not reply at once, only drew a deep breath, keeping her eyes lowered. The silence was broken by Lily, who cried upstairs, as if calling out at that very moment. Christopher closed his eyes, pressing his temples, torn between anger and recognition. That moment was an abyss. On one side, the pride that had always guided him. On the other, the truth that refused to be denied. When he opened his eyes again, something new flickered there. Not the certainty of judgment, but the doubt of a man on the brink of transformation. That week, Christopher Blake was invited to a charity dinner organized by the city's most influential businessmen, an event he could not miss. The ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, with guests dressed in luxury, laughing and toasting with champagne. But behind Christopher's flawless exterior was a mind in turmoil. Since the stormy night, his life had shifted off its axis, and nothing seemed to return to place. He watched the faces around him, but could only think of Hannah Miller and the moment he had found her with Lily in her arms. Every applause and every word of flattery he received rang hollow, like meaningless echoes. For the first time, Christopher felt that all the wealth he had amassed was worthless compared to his daughter's life, and that life he owed to the woman he had sworn to keep away. While addressing the audience, speaking of business and philanthropy, Christopher felt the emptiness of his own words. He spoke of generosity, yet at home he upheld a rigidity that had nearly cost him what he loved most. His eyes drifted for an instant over the crowd, and unbidden, he recalled the image of his daughter suffocating and Hannah's desperate gaze. The vision pressed itself upon him as an undeniable truth. He faltered briefly in his speech, startling the audience, and silence fell instantly across the hall. Proud, he drew a deep breath and resumed speaking, but could no longer follow the prepared script. His inner struggle had reached its peak. Continue playing the role of the unshakable man, or expose the vulnerability he had hidden for so long. With an unexpected gesture, Christopher set aside his notes and spoke from the heart. Life has ways of teaching us lessons when we least expect it, he said, his voice resonating through the hall. Shock rippled across the faces before him, for they had expected figures and statistics, not confessions. Recently, I realized that all my control, all my discipline, and all my pride mean nothing compared to the value of a fragile life. My daughter was nearly taken from me, and she is only here because someone had the courage to do what I had forbidden. A murmur spread among the audience, stunned by the vulnerability of such a feared man. Yet Christopher felt the words lift a weight from his shoulders. In front of everyone, he acknowledged Hannah's importance, not merely as an employee, but as the woman who had restored his daughter's life, and, without realizing, his own humanity. Christopher Blake's confession echoed through the hall like unexpected thunder. All eyes turned to him, some filled with respect, others with astonishment, for no one had ever seen this powerful man expose his heart. The silence was broken by timid applause that soon swelled into a warm ovation, as if everyone recognized the courage it took to admit vulnerability. Standing before the audience, Christopher felt a knot in his throat and thought of Hannah Miller, remembering the moment he had seen her save his daughter. The memory brought tears to his eyes, and for the first time in years, he did not hold them back. In that moment, Christopher was no longer the untouchable millionaire, but simply a grateful father. When he returned home, he found Hannah in the hallway, finishing her daily tasks with her usual discretion. The mansion, once so cold, seemed warmed by her silent presence. Christopher approached slowly, his steps lacking the rigidity of the past, and called her by name with a gentleness that surprised her. Hannah lifted her eyes, anxious, as if awaiting a harsh command. Instead, she heard something she had never imagined. "Thank you for saving my daughter, and for saving me too." Emotion surged through Hannah's heart. Silent tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time, She saw in that man a humanity buried beneath layers of pain. Lily, from the crib, let out a soft laugh, as if blessing that silent reconciliation. In that moment, the mansion ceased to be merely a place of rules and became a home under reconstruction. The days that followed brought subtle yet profound changes. Christopher no longer watched Hannah with suspicion, and Lily stretched her little arms toward her without fear. The millionaire still bore his scars, but now there was space for gratitude and hope. Hannah, in turn, had found in that house not only work, but also a sense of purpose she thought she had lost forever. And so, in a story marked by pain, pride, and redemption, destiny revealed its greatest truth. No one can predict from where the saving hand will come. If the story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so you won't miss any new videos, and of course, leave your like, because it truly helps the channel continue bringing more emotional stories like this one. Thank you so much for your support.